Call us back to order. Mr. Butler.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the Carlette Walker witness situation. And the thing about it is, certainly we appreciate Ms. Walker offering to come in tomorrow, but tomorrow is not a good day for the commission. There are already 2 witnesses, as you know, pre-scheduled to be heard from SCE&G tomorrow. We fear that bringing in Ms. Walker might somehow limit the proper amount of time for cross-examination of those very important SCE&G witnesses. So we certainly do appreciate Ms. Walker's willingness to come. Certainly, you know, she would be welcome as a rebuttal witness, perhaps at a later time. The other concern is that right now we're in the direct portion of the SCE&G testimony, and we fear that it would be a bit out of order to take her at this time. So she certainly, you know, would be a witness that may possibly appear before the commission at a later time, and we do appreciate her willingness at this particular point. You may want to just check in with her and inform her that the commission is certainly interested in her, but just not tomorrow. That's agreeable. I will do that. All right. Thank you, Mr. Cox.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. All right, Mr. Richardson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And in this morning's questioning, we had 3 exhibits that we referenced that I wasn't aware were not already in the record, and we would like to make them exhibits now, hearing exhibits now. They are Mr. Addison's 2008 testimony, just the relevant portions from his 2008 testimony. We'll make that the next hearing exhibit.
Okay, Mr. Addison's 2008 testimony will be exhibit number 59.
And we also refer to Mr. Addison's 2016 testimony in front of the commission. That should be the next hearing exhibit.
Mr. Richardson, we have the emails here.
I'm sorry, that will be the next one that we mark. So the
Your warning. Say again, please, for the
next hearing exhibit should be the Addison, Andrew. The next hearing exhibit should be the Addison 2008 testimony that was referred to this morning.
We have that.
We got the 2008 in, so.
All right, and after that, Andrew, the next exhibit after the 2008 testimony should be the Addison 2016 testimony.
Yeah, we got 2016, but he said 2008. So,
You're going to get 3. I apologize for the order in which they're being handed up.
So the 2016 testimony, I believe, Mr. Chairman, will be 60.
okay, 2016 testimony will be 60. And then
Emails.
October 28th, 2014 email.
The October 28th emails, 2014, will be 61, exhibit number 61. Okay.
Thank
We
you very
good
much.
this week? We good, y'all? Everybody, we're all on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Addison, when did SC&G start misleading the commission about this project?
I don't believe SC&G misled the commission about the project.
SC&G never said anything misleading at all to ORS or the commission about this project.
I'm not aware that the company has misled either about the project.
In August of 2014, SC&G created an internal EAC review team to begin reviewing the consortium's estimate at completion provided in August, right?
A team was assembled in that time frame, yes.
And the internal review team came up with a much higher amount as the best estimate of the cost of completion of the project in 2015, didn't it?
I believe the internal team did come up with an analysis that was higher than the contractor's EAC.
And that estimate was actually $500 million greater than the consortium's estimate at completion, wasn't it?
That's correct.
And the internal review team determined it would be needed to be an increase of $1.2 billion to the project budget versus the consortium saying only $698 million.
Well, I wasn't presented the information from the team. Again, there's some of the departed executives, I think, were presented that information. But my understanding is that team ran an analysis presuming the productivity factors did not change, and they came up with a number that was approximately $500 million higher.
Thank you. And actually, the internal team concluded that those productivity factors on which the consortium's estimate was based were not achievable. Isn't that right?
I don't know that they concluded that. I believe they concluded that if you use the existing performance factors, it would result in $500 million higher.
Let's look at, this is in Jones Surrebuttal Exhibit 12, the EAC report. You can see it attached to the email on the screen from the internal review. And you make it a little larger. You see the second line where it says the consortium assumed a goal of 1.15 and that does not appear to be achievable?
I do.
And do you remember that it actually took about 6 months for the review team to finish its work before the modification proceeding was filed, and they had actual numbers for the productivity during that 6 month window? Do you remember that?
I don't, because I wasn't involved in it directly, but I believe that's a fair representation. But I don't remember it specifically.
Okay, so in addition to it not appearing to be achievable to the review team at this point in their report, we know it was not achieved either.
We do, and I believe Mr. Byrne testified to that in this proceeding.
We'll see. And then you see how the EAT at the bottom of the portion up there, the EAC review team recalculated the cost with a factor of 1.4 to go, and that resulted in the internal team's calculation of estimates at completion, right?
I agree.
All right. And you were in communication with Ms. Walker about the internal EAC review team's work, weren't you?
I don't remember being in communication with her in detail about this.
All right, let's look at the Deposition Exhibit 7, September 25th, 2014 email. This is from Carlette Walker on September 15th to you about the EAC. I'm sorry, go up a little bit, please. Let's start with that. You actually asked her that morning, did your team get the estimate complete on the assumptions we discussed? And her response to you was, thought I would share them this afternoon, but if you want them earlier, I can send them to you. You remember that exchange?
I don't until this discovery began.
And you know who Ken Brown is, don't you?
Mr. Brown was a senior engineer in the business and finance group.
And he was actually head of the EAC review team, wasn't he?
That's what I've come to understand recently. I did not know that.
And the EAC review team reported to Carlette Walker, didn't they?
I don't believe so, but I was not involved with it at the time.
If they didn't report to her, they reported to Skip Smith, right?
I just don't know because I wasn't involved in it. And I probably should clarify. Could we put that email back up?
Sure, please. Witness would like to refer back to it. Thanks. And Mr. Chairman, we'll go ahead and mark this as the next hearing exhibit.
I believe that is referring to, you see the title of it is Escalated EAC, and I believe that is referring to the overlay of the escalation or the inflation, if you will, on the EAC provided by Westinghouse to the company that the company relied upon. So this is applying. I don't believe this has anything to do with that internal team's work.
Well, when the
Hey,
EAC...
hang on one second. This is going to be, if we're going to enter it, it's going to be exhibit number 62. Just want to make sure we got that on the record now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When the consortium sends SC&G the estimate of completion in August, one of the ways that you keep straight about talking about the same numbers is that they would do the calculation in $2007 when the project started, correct?
Precisely, which is why the escalation would need to be applied to it.
And so one of the aspects of both reviewing and validating and analyzing the estimate of completion received from the consortium would be this escalation analysis of what numbers they've given you, right?
I don't think it's an escalation analysis. It's more of overlaying the expected inflation on top of the $2007, depending upon which year they fall in, and the forecasted inflation.
Right, because the consortium provides you $2007, and for any review or analysis to be done by the EAC review team in 2014, you've got to escalate those costs up to even start the review. Isn't that right?
Right. You've got to escalate them through the projected completion of the project.
And so the escalation of EAC is actually the first step in the EAC review and analysis done internally, isn't it?
I don't know which step it would be. I wasn't involved in it.
But it's definitely part of the EAC review done by SC&G after receiving the consortium's estimate, isn't it?
Well, our quarterly reporting to the commission requires the escalation to be applied to it, so it's a step in the process.
And so it's not really fair to say that the escalation ESC is not part of the EAC review done internally by SC&G, is it?
I didn't say that. I'm sorry if I miscommunicated. What I was saying was I believe this email was related to applying the escalation to the information that Westinghouse provided in their EAC.
Right, and that email was only a couple of weeks after you first received the consortium's EAC, correct?
I believe it was more than that. I believe it was received in early August, and that was mid-September.
Within the first month. And then the EAC review team's work carried over into early 2015, right?
I don't know when it was completed.
Let's go back to Mr. Brown. Did you know that he believed the schedule on which the EAC review team was basing its work was not achievable?
No.
Let's pull that up, please. This is Mr. Brown, the senior engineer in business and finance for this project for SC&G's testimony. And the question is, what was your understanding of his proposal to use the schedule we plan to file with the PSC, and whether we think it's achievable or not? And Mr. Brown's answer is, in order to do the cost estimate, you have to have some schedule to base your cost on. And my question on the second page was, what schedule do we need to base our cost on? And we're going to look at this email in a second, but he's discussing email, and he goes on to say, Kevin, Mr. Cocom's response to me was that it needed to be the same schedule that we filed with the PSC so that the cost and the schedule would match and that they would appear copacetic with each other and that they work with each other. And at least I did not, and I'm sure Kevin didn't either, believe it was an achievable schedule. You see his testimony there?
Mr. Chairman, I want to object that the email has been misread. The word does not appear at line 23. It says that they would be copacetic with each other, not that they would appear to be. I'd like the record to reflect that.
Well,
objection to the formal question.
Sustained, and the record will reflect that. It would be copacetic.
Thank you, and appreciate I need a lunch mulligan. Obviously,
one mulligan granted.
Thank you very much. Obviously, Mr. Cocom's and Mr. Brown, working for SC&G, did not believe it was an achievable schedule that they were using. Isn't that right?
I'm not sure what the two of them believed.
And the cost curve for the total cost. Let's look at that exhibit that they were talking about. Actually, this is not the email. I want to skip to the one that they were just talking about. It's got number 5. Thank you. Mr. Cocom's is one of SC&G's witnesses in these proceedings, isn't he?
Yes.
And he worked for you then, and he works for you now, doesn't he?
Yes.
And you know that he told the EAC team they should be prepared to receive a schedule from the consortium that wasn't achievable?
No.
Okay. Let's look at number 5 at the first email. This is from. Let's go to the previous email on the second page, and this is from Mr. Cocom. Excuse me. Can you go to page 2? Thank you. This is Mr. Brown talking about the EAC review team, and he's got a number of items they're going to have to deal with. And number 5 says, what schedule do we want to base our EAC on? That's from Mr. Brown to the EAC team. If you go back to the first page, let's see what Mr. Cocom's response is on number 5. I think it needs to be the schedule plan we plan to file with the PSC, whether we think it is achievable or not. Can you show the header of that email, please? Thank you. And that shows that it's from Mr. Cocom's on August 25th, 2014, to Ken Brown, Abney Smith, that's Skip Smith, right?
Right.
Works for Carlette Walker. There's Carlette Walker's on there, Sherry Wicker, Shirley Johnson, Marion Cherry, and Kyle Young. And its subject is preparation for getting and reviewing the EAC.
At one fine point, I don't think Mr. Smith worked for Ms. Walker. I think he was a peer of hers.
Peer?
Yes.
In the same area of finance for nuclear?
I think he ran the team that reported to the Nuclear Line Organization.
Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
And is it accurate to conduct a cost analysis based on an unachievable schedule?
No, if that were the case, it would not be accurate. But I was not there at the time that this was being done. Of course, you'll see Mr. Cocom's here later. But I don't know what that team based their, or anyone who expressed that based their conclusions on compared to what others may have known that the team was not aware of. Okay. The contractor provided, under an EAC contract, provided the estimated cost and schedule that was relied upon for the proceeding.
And were you aware of any information different than what the EAC team, who was working with these numbers and on behalf of SC&G, did you have any different information than they did, or better information?
I had the information that was filed with the commission that came from the contractor themselves, and I would think the contractor themselves would have more information about it than would a team of our employees.
Has the contractor ever appeared in front of the commission?
I don't believe so.
And even using the unrealistic schedule that this SCNG's internal review team did to conclude that the project was really $500 million more, even using the schedule that wasn't achievable, this internal review team concluded that it was going to cost $500 more than what the contractor was telling SCNG. Isn't that right?
I believe the product of the team was $500 million difference.
And if they had used a more realistic schedule that was showed the true delays in the project, the team would have forecasted a much higher cost, wouldn't it?
I can't speak to the how realistic the schedule was or not, so I don't know how to answer your question. I was not involved in the construction oversight of the project, and I just can't opine on that.
But you do realize that if there is a more realistic schedule showed further delays, that would also necessitate cost increases.
Makes sense that it could. I don't know what else the contractor may be able to do to mitigate that. That's really what's missing here is what did the contractor know that this small team did not know? And I don't know the answer to that.
Well, we do know in hindsight, don't we? They didn't know anything better.
I can't state that. I don't know.
They never got better, though, did they?
I don't believe they got better, no. But I don't know what this team, what the line leadership knew at this time.
Well, a year later, y'all were doing an analysis of the fixed price option, right?
Correct.
In 2016?
Yes.
And were you aware that Mr. Brown did an analysis there that showed the project, based on a 12-month delay, would cost an additional $1 billion?
I don't believe I'm familiar with that.
Okay. Let's look at it. Show the header first, please. Thank you. This is October 6th of 2015. I'm looking for the Addison email about the fixed price analysis. 2016. Show us the email first before we get into the spreadsheet. All right, I'm sorry. This was not a year later. This was actually right in the middle of the EAC review team. October 6, 2015, from Kevin Cocombs to important enough that it goes to Kevin Marsh, Al Bynum, Steve Byrne, Carlette Walker, Jeff Archery, Skip Smith again, Mr. Brown, Mr. Cherry, copying Ron Jones and Jimmy Addison, and Mr. Crosby. Go to the spreadsheet that was attached to this email. Let's show where the delay is being modeled. And we talked earlier about this. This is 3 different scenarios. We may not be able to zoom in enough to show, but this is hearing exhibit 31. Can you just zoom in on the one that shows the 12-month delay of the substantial completion dates? That's right. 12-month delay. And then at the bottom, let's see what the analysis revealed. Can you highlight those last 3 lines on the far right line? Thank you. Actually, can you not just highlight it, but make it readable? And Mr. Addison, obviously that when you include Santee Cooper in a number, you've got to take essentially 55% of that number to get the cost to SCNG, right?
That's correct.
And so this shows that the total cost of the project being estimated in late 2015 during this EAC review with a 12-month delay to the schedule is actually total project cost an additional $2 billion. Isn't that right?
It appears so.
And SC&G's portion of that would be just over $1 billion.
Right. I would say that's at a different point in time, I believe, than our earlier exchange. I think this is about a year later, correct? I think this was for the evaluation of, this was during the negotiation period around the amendment to the contract, and was, I presume, done so that we could evaluate the potential inclusion of the fixed price option.
Right, and I misspoke earlier about the year later part, but this is the analysis of the fixed price option that was going to go into the October 2015 EPC amendment, right? That gave you the option of exercising the fixed price option in 2016.
Well, I believe it was some support for that. Probably Mr. Cocombs will be a better person to address exactly what it was for, but it makes sense given the time frame. Of course, that was executed, I believe, on the 27th of that month. So a lot of negotiations going on at this point in time.
And this was part of the internal review to protect SC&G in those negotiations and negotiating with the consortium.
Yeah, not to quibble with you again, but I think it was. I think all of this effort that was being done for both owners. My recollection of those negotiations were conducted jointly with Santee.
Right. And in part because they may have had a say, but y'all were their agent for purposes of the contract and amendments to the contract.
Yeah, again, I'm not familiar with all the provisions of the contract, but I'm fairly confident that we could not do anything of this magnitude without them agreeing along with us. We couldn't just act as their agent and make an amendment of this magnitude. I believe that's true in the contract, and I can tell you I know it was true in practice, as we were jointly at the table.
Let's go back to the cost curve, if you don't mind. Are you familiar with the April 6, 2015 cost curve charts that were provided by Mr. Crosby to SC&G?
No. If you're referring to what was presented here a few days ago, I saw it when it was here.
Let's look at the email that came by. You're just saying you don't remember having seen this.
Right.
Okay, before this hearing. Let's see who it came from. See, Mr. Cherry is sending this on April 6, 2015 to Mr. Jones, Ms. Walker, Skip Smith, Mr. Brown, Ms. Wicker, Mr. Cocombs, Ms. Johnson. You know, a good bit of the not senior executives of SCANA, but the senior management for the finance of the new nuclear project for SC&G, right?
I agree with that.
And the attachment to it has 4 charts. I just want to look at the cost curve chart, the last one. Thank you. Any way to make that bigger? Do you recognize a chart like this?
I remember, I believe this is a similar chart that we saw earlier in these proceedings.
Right, but more generally, I mean, this is a chart showing the amount of cost is on the left side. So the vertical axis shows what the total cost is expected to be for a certain type of cost within the EPC contract, right?
Well, it appears to be, but if you ask if I'm familiar with it, I'm not.
Okay. And the bottom is over time, right?
It appears to be.
Objection, Lock Foundation. The witness has said he doesn't recognize the document, hadn't seen it, doesn't know anything about it, so he shouldn't be asked about it.
Okay, we think he can be asked about it, so overruled.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And where it says EAC, are you familiar with the PSC filing that was made in March 12th of 2015?
Yes, I am now. I didn't participate in the proceeding, but I'm familiar with it.
Do you know what amount was being asked for the modification of the budget?
I can't quote it specifically, but I believe it was around $600 million, $650.
And that was actually the SC&G portion right? Because you're coming to the commission.
Correct.
And SC&G is the only regulated utility involved in this project.
Correct.
And you can see if you were to gross that up to the entire project, that it's right about the EAC line, the blue line there of $1.1 billion. Does that seem reasonable and correct?
On a grossed up basis, it does.
Yeah. And then you can see there's two scenarios above that that on the top left assume different productivity factors and what the resulting cost increases would be for different productivity factors and labor ratios. Do you see this?
I do.
And the EAC, we know from previous testimony, the consortium was basing its EAC on the 1.15, and the scenarios 1 and 2 contain significantly higher EAC numbers and correspondingly higher estimates at completion, right?
I agree.
Right, and then you see in the chart there's a green line that basically is actual, right? I mean, that has September 14th, which is the date of that email we just looked at between you and Ms. Walker when y'all were escalating the costs from the consortium, to January 15th, approximately 5 months of actual productivity ratios and inputs. Do you see that?
I do.
And do you have any reason to dispute that these are the actual productivity factors and labor ratios for the project during that time period?
I have no idea, but I can't dispute it.
Yeah. Let's go back to the cost curve. And do you remember from our earlier testimony that there's no cost curve for that actual completion rates for the construction project at this time?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that.
Yeah, you see the scenario, the 4 lines that are on this chart.
Yes.
But you don't see one for the actual of what the completion rate was for the project during this period during which the EAC team was doing its review of the consortium's work. Do you?
I may be missing your point, sir, but I think these are projections. So I'm getting confused on how there would be an actual in a projection.
Right. Well, the EAC, the blue line, is what you got from the consortium in August of 2014, right?
I believe so.
And it corresponds to, you can see the little yellow dot on the right side, the PSC filing in March 12th of 2015, right? And it matches up.
Okay.
And the question is, by the time you made the filing in March 12th of 2015, we could look back and see 5 or 6 months of actual performance that had been promised, remember, by the consortium to be greater than 1.15, right?
I agree, and I think that's what we discussed earlier. I think that's what Mr. Byrne testified to in that proceeding, that they had to achieve a substantial improvement to meet these numbers.
And we'll look at what he said in a minute. But on this chart, the cost curves show the different scenarios of higher productivity factors because they actually weren't even close to achieving the 1.15, were they?
Higher numbers, I guess, lower productivity, right?
And at the time this chart came to SC&G and all the folks that you relied on for the nuclear project, as we saw in the email, it was April 2015, and there was 6 months of actual performance since you received the numbers and the forecasted numbers from the consortium, right?
There would be.
And this was less than a month after you made the filing on March of 2015 to modify the budget, right?
Appears to be, yes.
And so now we have, very helpfully from this review team, the actual numbers and the actual performance of the construction project for the 5 or 6 months between September and January during the period in which y'all were doing the review, right?
You said January. I think it was later than that, right? But yes.
This chart only contains the data through January.
I'm sorry. Okay, I agree.
And when they were looking through those scenarios, you can see they had numbers 172. I can't read it, but I think it's in the 140 range and you can see the cost curves are higher than what was submitted to the Public Service Commission on March 12th, right?
I agree.
Now back to the question, which is, with the actual data that we have, you don't see a corresponding cost curve on this chart, do you? It was just the two scenarios.
I don't see one, no.
And do you know where that cost curve would be if it had been drawn?
I don't. It would logically be higher.
Not just higher, but off the chart, right?
I presume so, yes.
Did you know that that ORS was trying to get more information about SCNG's EAC review process during this time?
I did not. I was not involved in the interaction on the project.
In November of 2014, though, you were copied on an email where Duke Scott, who was the executive director of ORS at the time, was asking for more information regarding the status of the EAC. Let's see it. Need bigger. You can see this was actually produced from your file. It's got your name at the top. That shows who was a producing party. But it goes from Ms. Walker to you and copy and Skip Smith on Sunday, November 9th, 2014. You see that?
I do.
And can we get it any larger? What was happening was you had a quarterly meeting being scheduled. This is from Carlette Walker to really Ron Jones, that they had a quarterly meeting scheduled with Duke Scott. And he had specifically indicated he wanted to provide him with updates on the EAC and their delay of negotiations, right?
It appears
see that first two lines?
It appears to, yes. What was the timing of this? Just so that date.
The date of the email is November the 9th, 2014.
Right. I was certainly aware that Mr. Scott, along with ORS and along with the owners, was seeking more information from the consortium about the schedule during this time period.
And it goes on to talk about there were ongoing issues with both the review and a negotiation with the consortium about the discrepancy in the numbers that the SCNG believed and that the consortium was providing, right?
I'm not sure I follow that.
Well, it's hard to read, and if Mr. Chairman benefit me, we'll pass out copies and make this a hearing exhibit itself.
Would help, yeah. It'll be hearing exhibit number 63. Having a hard time getting which one of my focals and my trifocals.
I was thinking the same thing. Reading glasses won't help, and I don't have a telescope.
Yeah. Can I get one?
Please. And we're looking at the email at the bottom, which is the one from Carlette Walker to you. And your response is just above there, November 9th, 2014. And you actually copy Mr. Marsh on your response to Ms. Walker, right?
I did. It looks like less than half hour later I copied him that Sunday evening.
Right. You were heading out for other work, and you said if you can provide her feedback on negotiation points, so enlisting his support, his help on this issue. And his response is just above that, November the 10th, the next afternoon, saying that he had talked to Kenny. That would have been Kenny Jackson, right?
I believe so.
And that we believe the message to ORS should be that we have had one initial meeting with the consortium and are still having discussions. They canceled the meeting because we're not ready. I believe there are more discussions to come, but can't predict the outcome. We should not get into the details of the discussion to date. That was Mr. Marsh's instructions to Ms. Walker about what she should tell ORS.
And I think I had copied Mr. Marsh on this because I was not knowledgeable about what's going on. I was not involved in the negotiations, and I wanted her to have his input on a timely basis.
And more than that, you in the email right above that, you made sure that she had what you need, right? Carlette, does this give you what you need?
Right. I'm making sure that what she heard from him answers her question.
And then just to finish this, let's look at the email she responds to you on the 10th that night. She says, I also have the benefit of talking with George Winnick. He's the outside lawyer from Atlanta, right? For SC&G on this project?
For the owners, yes.
For the owners. And then there's some description probably of what Mr. Winnick told her about what to tell ORS that's been redacted for privilege. You see that?
I do.
And so now you can see that Duke Scott and ORS was asking for more information regarding the status of the EAC and the review at this time in November, can't you?
I think he was, and I don't know, I was not involved in the negotiations, but I think he's looking for an update on how the negotiations are going.
Yeah, we read that first, to provide him with updates on the EAC and the delay negotiations.
Right, and it appears, based upon Mr. Marsh's response, that those negotiations are ongoing.
But it also appears that SC&G is filtering information being provided to ORS, doesn't it?
I don't know what Mr. Marsh knew that he didn't put in the letter, so I mean, I just can't answer that. That's one of the difficulties of several folks not being here anymore. Presume you had access and probably took advantage of it in the depositions.
Well, we have the benefit of his statement to Ms. Walker on November the 10th in that third email down. We should not get into the details of the discussions to date.
That's what he says.
And let's look at that's what I wanted to point out. So my follow-up question was, and I understand this may not deal with you personally, but for SC&G, they were filtering information during this time of what was being provided and shared with ORS, weren't they?
Well, the way I read this one is the negotiations were not complete, and he did not want to provide a lot of details about the interim negotiations.
All right. In a meeting with ORS.
That's correct.
And during this time, were you aware that SC&G was distributing talking points to employees about how to deal with ORS?
No, I don't remember that.
Let's look at Brown's deposition on that point. Since he was a senior engineer for business for finance and dealing with the nuclear project, right?
Yeah, he was in the line organization, not in my organization, but yes. He was originally with Santee Cooper and retired there and came to work for SC&G.
And on page 232 of his deposition, he says, if you can highlight it for us so they can follow along, I was instructed what to say. We had talking points that were developed, and I was to provide those talking points. Apologize, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. We'll have to move on from that. We'll come back to it if we can. Do you believe, Mr. Addison, that it was being completely transparent to filter information from ORS?
I don't know that information was filtered from ORS. I mean, you're asking me about some things, and I understand your concern. You're asking me about things that I didn't have personal awareness of. I can't tell you whether anything was filtered or not.
Do you think it was being completely transparent not to disclose what SCNG's internal review team concluded about the estimates to completion?
Yeah, that's an important question, I think. And based upon what I know here today, the company provided what the company believed was the most accurate information, being that from a contractor that's building the plants, not only building these, but building more in Georgia and involved in others around the world. The company felt like it was in the customer's and the company's best interest to rely upon what a contractor that does this was telling us it was going to cost. Having said that, I'm painfully aware of the eroded trust and the frustration that I've heard the last several days here and frankly in the public hearings about this issue. And sitting here today with perfect hindsight, frankly, I wish the company had disclosed those, even if it had caused a deterioration of the negotiating power with the consortium. And I think that could have happened. But I wish it had disclosed those, just like it did similarly in 2016. Dr. Lynch ran scenarios at various performance factors and said, here are all the scenarios we think it makes sense for the fixed price option. If that had been done here, it was apparently done on existing historical factors. Others could have been done as well, and I don't think it would have changed the outcome. I believe that the parties would have concluded to go forward with it. But I regret where we are here. I regret the erosion of trust that's happened, and I wish that had happened. But that's my perfect 2020 hindsight, and I wasn't involved in the process at the time. So I'm not. I don't mean to be taking shots at the folks that were.
Thank you for saying that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in respect to the filings that were made to the commission in 2015. But I did want to just ask, and I'm assuming this is true too, that to be completely transparent, there should have been a disclosure that that those ratios and labor ratios and productivity factors were not achievable too, that SCNG believed that the schedule and those productivity factors were not achievable.
You've shown me information that says a small group of people may have felt they were not achievable. It's possible that small group of people did not know what the plans of the contractor were. I don't know. I'm just offering that that's a possibility. My understanding is that it was based on historical performance factors. And I believe that same information was available to everybody that was involved in the proceeding. I would frankly be surprised if ORS had not run a similar analysis if it was based on the historical factors. But with perfect hindsight, I wish we had. I think we'd have had a discussion about it, and I think we'd be at the same spot we are today.
And ORS is monitoring not just the nuclear project, but almost all public utility projects in the state, right?
Absolutely. They've got an important and broad job.
And they weren't building a nuclear power plant.
They were not, and I didn't mean to imply that at all.
Let's talk about the March 12th, 2015 commission filing. I think it's relevant to some of what you just told us. The cost and schedule estimates that SCNG presented to commission in that modification document were material facts. Isn't that right?
I would agree with that.
Okay. And you would agree that the difference between $1.2 billion increase in the budget for SCNG's portion and a $700 million increase for the cost of completions, that's $500 million difference, is a material difference as well, right?
I would certainly agree with that if both numbers were reliable.
And SCNG did not reveal to the commission or to ORS in its 2015 that its 2015 internal estimate of completion did it. I mean, you just said that you
That's
thought
right.
we would provide it, but it didn't do it, did it?
It did not.
And SC&G also didn't disclose that its internal review and estimate was much higher than what had been submitted to the commission.
Again, it did not.
And so even though SC&G had concluded that the internal estimated cost was more accurate and that the productivity factors on which the consortium's estimate base was not achievable, they still didn't make that disclosure.
Again, I think we've talked about this a few times, but your presumption is that SCE&G concluded it was more accurate. I don't believe that's a fair assessment. I think a small group of employees may have come to that conclusion. I don't believe the company did.
And we saw the distribution list of those emails. I mean, when you say a small group, I mean, we're talking about the group, aren't we?
Are you talking about the ones that received the email? That doesn't mean that they believe what someone else said in the body of the email. I receive a lot of emails from things that people say, and it doesn't mean that I believe what they've said.
Right. I mean, Kevin Marsh and Steve Byrne, they're not doing the actual analysis, right? They're just assigning it to their best people, the senior engineers and the head of finance for the nuclear project, to do the analysis, right?
Yes, sir. I'm not familiar with how the team was formed. I don't know who asked for the product, and I was not presented that product. I'm not sure of who asked for what.
And in your department and areas of responsibility, I mean, you have to rely on the folks that you hire and promote to those levels that really know the materials and do the analysis, right?
Certainly.
And your pre-filed testimony makes it clear. And today you point to Mr. Cocombs and Mr. Brown and Mr. Young and Ms. Walker, folks that have been promoted and trained and put in positions of responsibility to make those determinations for the senior management, right?
That's right. And I'm not trying to be argumentative with you. I'm just saying my understanding of what these folks did here after the fact is that they extrapolated what would the future look like if the consortium didn't improve. And the consortium, I believe, was suggesting to the company they would improve and that to use the historical factor would not be accurate.
And when you're talking about this small group, I mean, it is true that this is the group for SC&G to do the EAC analysis and review. There wasn't a different group, or there wasn't an analysis being done by Mr. Byrne or Mr. Jones at a higher level, was it?
I'm not aware of any other one, but this was not a routine analysis that was going on. And I think one of the other complications the company had in 2015 is the exact risk that we're talking about here with productivity was identified in 2008 by the company in our application. There was a risk associated with that and several other factors, and there was a contingency set up for that very kind of thing. I think originally it was a little over $400 million. One of the interveners in the proceeding appealed that to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says that is not allowed by the BLRA, so you've got to remove that contingency, and of course we did. We came back to this commission and removed it. I believe if that had not been the case, and we're certainly going to comply with the Supreme Court, but there would have been a contingency in there for this, and this is the kind of thing that might well fit in that contingency. But we didn't have that option at this point in time. It had been stricken by the Supreme Court.
And contingencies are really much different than what we're talking about here, right? I mean,
I don't think so. I think that, and again, I wasn't involved in it. I believe the first time I've seen the detail of that was when your partner handed it to me in a deposition and walked me through it. But I believe that they were running a sensitivity analysis, essentially.
You're not saying the Supreme Court told SC&G not to provide its best estimates and the conclusions that it came to in reviewing the consortium's estimates? The commission did it.
I'm sorry. I'm absolutely not. What I think the Supreme Court said in summary is when you can specifically delineate the items and you have the detailed cost, you can include them, but not until then.
And a big difference between the contingencies that the Supreme Court was talking about that they took out of the earlier budgets and these estimates at completion, which were done every time you asked for a modification to the project construction schedules or budget, was what's measurable, right?
Yeah, I think we're talking about two different things with these EACs. I've only learned of the details of this recently, this internal project team's work, but I don't think that was done but once in the life of the project, as far as I'm aware. The EACs that were done each time that we came before the commission, or frankly, any time the consortium updated their costs, came from the consortium. That was the standard practice. That's what we relied upon. Each quarter, they would provide that information to Mr. Kokums, I believe, and it would roll up into the BLRA quarterly reports. This was my understanding, a one-off calculation by this team of what would it be if nothing improved. Not a routine calculation.
It wasn't routine because there hadn't been a modification to the schedule or the budget in front of the PSC since 2012. Isn't that right?
I think that's correct.
And we knew that the consortium had been rebaselining the project for almost a year at this point. You know that?
I believe so. I don't remember that.
So you're right. This wasn't routine at all. This was a pretty big deal to set the project on its path for the construction schedule and the construction budget forecast in order to get revised rates in 2015, right?
Well, in order to get a revised schedule and approved budget that future revised rates could be based upon, yes.
Because if you didn't do the modification in 2015 before the 2015 revised rate proceeding, you wouldn't have been eligible for any more revised rates, would you?
Well, that's correct. We have to be in compliance with the budget and the schedule within the schedule contingency.
And you knew that you weren't in compliance with the approved budget and schedules in going into 2015.
That's right, based upon what the consortium provided.
So this really important review of what the consortium was telling y'all mattered as well, because the consortium doesn't show up in front of the commission and isn't even regulated by the commission, is it?
I agree.
And so SC&G had to be certain and had to know what was the best estimate at completion to ask this commission to approve the schedule, both the schedule and the budgets.
I agree with you, and I believe the company's conclusion was that what the consortium, the contractor that was hired to build this, says it's going to take to build it was the best estimate. And Mr. Byrne disclosed that there were risks associated with it.
You don't deny that Carlette Walker provided you with a file of documents prior to the March 2015 filing that documented her concern that the actual cost to complete the project were higher than the consortium estimate, do you?
I don't recall a specific file of documents. Again, Mr. Cox asked me about some of that a few weeks ago. I definitely remember one of the issues that was in those documents. But I absolutely know that she had concern about the productivity of the contractor. She clearly expressed that to me.
And the productivity affects the cost to completion, doesn't it?
Well, it's going to affect it for someone. The question is who pays it.
And in 2015, the cost would certainly fall on SC&G ratepayers if approved, wouldn't they? Early 2015?
If approved by the commission.
Mm-hmm. So it mattered what you told the commission?
It certainly did.
Okay. We're looking at Walker's deposition exhibit number 5. This is an email from Ms. Walker and Mr. Kassam dated March the 3rd, 2015. That was less than 2 weeks before the March 12th filing. Sorry, I have trouble reading it from here. Can you, yeah. It says, are you invited to the Monday morning meeting to discuss the facts and decide the PSC project filing strategy? Now, was there any other project filing going on in early March of 2015?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay. But it actually was, there was a greater strategy at that point in time, right? That the modification had to be filed first so that then the revised rate filing could be made based on the new approved schedule and budget, right?
Right. That was true any time that changed.
Okay. Well, you had revised rate filings in 2013 and 14 that didn't have modification filings, right?
No, I'm sorry. I meant any time that the schedule or cost changed, that had to be approved before you could make the revised rate filing.
Right. And you see the second sentence, she basically says, just wondering, and she's telling Mr. Kassam, it appears I am on a different page from all of senior staff, Byron, and that's Byron Henson.
I presume so.
And he was kind of the liaison with ORS.
Correct.
Chad, who's the attorney. Belton, who's an outside attorney.
Correct.
Should be a lot of BS flying during the meeting. And then she tells Mr. Kassam, Jimmy and I met last week, and I explained my position, and he said he was where I was, but had been convinced that the other position makes more sense. He told me he wants me to voice my concerns, opinions, ... Right. And in parentheses, she says, how do you spell suicide? Were you familiar with her communication to Mr. Kassam about these issues and the project filing strategy?
No. But let me be sure I understand your question. Was I familiar with it at the time?
Right.
No.
You're familiar with it now?
Your partner showed it to me, I believe, a few weeks ago.
Okay. And the bottom line is you just can't recall whether she gave you these documents, the file of documents about the actual cost to complete the project being higher than the consortium's.
I don't remember a specific file. I clearly remember her concern over the ability of the consortium to improve their performance or not. And that was openly discussed by the company, and the decision was made to rely upon the information that consortium provided and disclosed that those were going to be very challenging to meet.
Did you know that this stack of documents or charts and slides and email, she called it the Jimmy file?
I did not know that until I was asked recently.
Okay. Let's take a look at it. It includes some spreadsheets with anticipated costs, documents related to additional costs because of the shield building issues, and some of the slides from the EAC presentation. This particular slide, she stated that it has a potential target cost dated February 24th, 2015. Can we show the additional cost of $1.2 billion? Potential target cost dated February 24th, 2015, that shows the additional cost just of SCANA's portion, or SC&G's portion, of $1.2 billion. And again, Mr. Chairman, this is Exhibit 5 of the Walker deposition. I'm sorry, Hearing Exhibit 32. Walker's deposition, Exhibit 32. So Walker's deposition, Exhibit 32, can you show us additional cost, $1.2 billion? And can you also, while they're doing that, Mr. Addison, just tell us, because these are initialized, KRK is Mr. Cocombs? You know that?
I don't know that for certain.
All right, how about KJB, Mr. Ken Brown?
I don't know that for certain either.
And you see it's actually the third line down on this particular. It's showing the 55% numbers. If you look at the far right, they haven't been grossed up. The EPC target and the T&M, that's what's that, time and materials?
I believe so.
Those are aspects of the costs under the EPC, right?
Yes.
And that shows the additional cost would be a total at $1.2 billion. And we've been talking about that, right?
Yes.
I mean, this shows what we've been talking about with the EAC team's review. And in this file from this internal review, Kim Brown's analysis shows that based on the January productivity and completion rates, this is the 26, that based on the January 2015 productivity and completion rates that were going on at the time, this is Kim Brown's analysis. You got to get the bottom. There you go. That the months to complete at the January rate was 318 months, or 26.5 years. Do you see that now?
I see it.
Did you know that at the time?
No.
And I'm assuming you didn't provide this to Mr. Marsh either.
I don't remember the information myself. I do remember, as I said a few questions ago, Ms. Walker bringing up one of the issues that is in this set of documents that Mr. Cox showed me, but I don't remember all of this.
And the issue that you remember her talking to you about right here before the March 12th, 2015 filing with you was productivity and labor ratio type concerns?
No, I remember that general issue.
Okay.
And it wasn't, I mean, look, the project's had productivity issues since it began, right? Or at least for several years. The item I remember specifically that she brought up to me was the CB&I, the contractor, subcontracting one of the components being built. I believe it was the shield building panels to one of their affiliates, and she was concerned about that issue. That's the one I remember.
All right. And
Cox and I discussed a few weeks ago.
Thank you for that. And we'll talk about the shield building problems in a minute, because those aren't actually on any of this analysis because it wasn't known at this time. I mean, it knew it was a problem, but the new problem about the shield building in 2015 wasn't known as of March 2015, was it?
I don't know. I thought on one of the earlier sheets you had up there, it had something about the shield building on it. I don't.
Because it and other modules have been a problem for years at this point, right?
There were plenty of challenges with modules, yes.
And on the productivity issues and the productivity factors, you can see there's a couple of lines there under Ken's analysis that talk about to-go man hours, direct, which is short for direct craft. It's the major driver of the man hours required on building a nuclear power plant. Do you know that?
I don't. I'm not a construction person. I'm sorry.
No problem.
I mean, it's logical to me, but I don't know it from firsthand experience. I didn't have any construction oversight.
All right. And all of these calculations go into the analysis that productivity and completion rates for the project. Do you know that?
I don't know that.
All right. And isn't it true that when the request to revise the cost and budget schedule for the commission was filed with the commission in March of 2015, that the schedule sought from the commission, approval from the commission, was much lower than the analysis that Ms. Walker and the EAC review team is showing here?
The $500 million we discussed earlier?
That's right.
I would agree that.
And also, do you remember that Carlette Walker had some significant concerns about seeking commission approval to the capital costs that were lower than the total EPC target and T&M increase request of $952? Did you? I'm
not following you there. I'm sorry.
All right, can we show it? This is something I believe you helped generate. Was that there was a total EPC target and T&M increase request of $952,372.
What's the time frame of this?
This is all right before the March 12th, 2015 filing to seek the modification of the schedule. So if you see at the top, it says February 2015 PSC update filing, and then it says these are SC&G's costs. And it talks about the different elements of the total EPC target and time and materials increase request. And it actually includes a decrease for liquidated damages, and it's got other aspects of the increase being sought.
I see it. I don't recall it.
Do you remember this being part of what was submitted to the commission to seeking approval for this modification?
I don't. I did not participate in the 2015 filing.
Okay. And we know, but you do know that the amount being sought was actually $698 million, not $952 million.
That's what I recall. Yes.
Excuse me. So let's look at the testimony that SC&G submitted to the commission in 2015. I know you all and SC&G relied on Mr. Byrne a good bit for this project. So let's look at page 36 of his testimony in the 2015 docket. We'll hand this out and ask that it be marked as a hearing exhibit.
This will be hearing exhibit number 64.
We'll also put this up on the screen.
Need one.
Yep, definitely.
Thank
Yes, you do. This is the direct testimony of Mr. Byrne in the docket 2015-103-E. Now let's go to page 36 and look at the line that starts in March of 2015. That one sentence.
I'm sorry, what page is it?
Should be on page 36 at the bottom.
Okay.
I actually want to start with it where it says in March of 2015, SC&G determined.
That's the beginning of a sentence?
You can see there it says SC&G determined in March of 2015 that the cost and construction schedules as updated by the consortium through that time were in fact the anticipated schedules for completion of the project as envisioned by the Base Load Review Act. See that?
I do.
That actually wasn't true at the time, was it?
Well, I think that's the same issue we talked about earlier, that the company determined that the best estimate was that one that was given to the company by the contractor. And I think Mr. Byrne disclosed otherwise in here that there were concerns with the ability of the consortium to meet that. In fact, it's on page 21, line 11. He says, for various reasons, to date, WEC CB&I has not met the overall PF on which the original cost estimates were based.
And that's helpful.
SC&G has not accepted responsibility to pay for this increase.
And that's about who pays for it, not the anticipated schedules and costs, does it?
Right, and it goes on to say unfavorable productivity factors have been a matter of frank and direct discussion between the parties. And goes on to talk about why the consortium has confidence in it.
And and all that's helpful, obviously, not only in disclosures, but in negotiating with the consortium. But what we're looking at are the disclosures that SC&G is making to the commission for the anticipated schedules for completion of the project, right?
I agree with that, and this is in the same document disclosed to the commission.
And the statements that you're reading are concerned with whether you're going to hold the consortium to a contract that you've got, and who pays for the additional costs, right?
Well, who pays for it and whether or not they can improve to the levels that they're forecasting.
We'll get back to that. Let's look at the next line that talks about the cost and construction schedules submitted here being reviewed and documented. All right, these schedules represent the best current forecast of the anticipated cost and anticipated construction schedules to complete the project. They're based on projections and data that the consortium has provided to SC&G. And here's the important part.
Can you give me the page reference? I think we
I
switched
apologize.
pages.
What page is this? 38.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sorry.
No problem. I thought I did, but I forgot.
May have.
And so the next part is the part I think is important, because Mr. Byrne goes on to say to this commission, and which SC&G has carefully studied and reviewed consistent with its duties as owner. And then the next line, Mr. Byrne continues, the construction schedule is based on a comprehensive identification and sequencing of tens of thousands of construction activities that must be accomplished for this to be completed. The cost schedule is based on identifying labor and other costs that must be incurred to complete the scopes of work listed on the schedules. Right? So it ties together both the schedule and its effect on the cost, and that their SC&G has to carefully study and review as part of its duties as the owner, this cost and schedule, right?
Yeah, I agree. That's what it says. And I think that's, again, I'm no construction expert, but I think that represents how complicated it is to estimate this. And I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect that's part of the reason that the company chose to base their estimate on what the consortium was telling them with this complicated thousands of activities rather than what our internal team had produced.
Mr. Byrne tells the commission that SC&G has carefully studied and reviewed these schedules and cost forecasts. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And that was true. They had carefully studied and reviewed it, hadn't they?
Sure, if Mr. Byrne said that here under sworn testimony, it was true.
Well, but it had an omission, though. Remember we talked earlier about omission of material fact?
Yes.
And the material facts that aren't here. It omitted the results of that study, though, didn't it?
I was sorry. I was referring to the EAC that was provided by the contractor.
I'm referring to the EAC review and the material difference concluded by the SC&G review team to what is being presented here by Mr. Byrne.
I understand.
So although he wants SC&G is taking full credit with the commission here that they studied and reviewed it, they omit that they came to a very different conclusion, didn't they?
As we discussed earlier, that analysis was not presented.
And when Mr. Byrne testifies to this commission that the construction schedule is based on this comprehensive sequencing of activities that must be accomplished, that actually wasn't true, was it?
I don't know how to draw that conclusion, and you're past my ability here now to
you may
comment
not
on it.
And you may not know, but what I want to ask is, then, are you just not familiar with all the artificial constraints that SC&G and the consortium had put on the schedule?
I'm not.
Okay. And the cost schedule is based on identifying labor and costs that must be incurred to complete the scopes of work listed on those schedules. And based on the EAC, internal EAC review team and their conclusions, that statement isn't true, is it?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Mr. Byrne's testimony, and I'm just not an expert in it and can't testify to it.
But it's clear he omitted the results of that EAC review team and the material difference concluded in their work.
I agree with you. There was a material difference between the EAC that the contractor provided and what the team computed.
Okay. And let's look at this paragraph at the bottom of page 38 where it says SC&G's construction experts have reviewed the schedules presented here, and we find that their scope and sequencing is logical and appropriate. That's not true if there were artificial constraints in the schedule, would it?
I apologize, but I'm not a construction expert, as that first sentence says, and I really can't testify to that.
And it goes on to say, because Mr. Byrne is there speaking supposedly with knowledge and certainly with authority of SC&G, that as to the timing and cost, the schedules are based on productivity factors that Westinghouse represents can be met given the current status of the project. And his carefully worded testimony there omits the material fact that SC&G knew that was not true.
What his next sentence says is that meeting these productivity factors will pose a challenge to WEC CB&I.
All right, well, let's keep seeing. Let's see what else he says to us then. On page 39. He says, for those reasons, he says, I can affirm, please go down, I can affirm that these schedules represent the best and most definitive forecast of the anticipated cost and construction schedule required to complete this project that is available as of the date of the filing of this testimony. I mean, that's just not true, is it?
I don't know. You would have to address that with somebody, either Mr. Byrne or with someone with the construction experience. I do know just above that on that page, on line 1, it says, as owner, SC&G has no basis or interest in insisting that WEC CB&I should use less challenging assumptions. However, SC&G does recognize that WEC CB&I has set itself a significant challenge as to future productivity. And I think that's where our difference is.
Well, let's talk about that. SC&G says we shouldn't let them off the hook in the contract negotiations outside of this commission, but that we actually are affirming these schedules are the best and most definitive forecast of the anticipated schedules and cost that SC&G is setting as the actual, right, as the anticipated schedules, the best information it has to the commission and to the public and to the ratepayers, not in negotiations with the consortium.
That's what he says. He says it's the best. He didn't say it's the only one. And as I said earlier, with the benefit of hindsight, I certainly wish the company had presented the other information and had run more analyses, much like we did in 2016. But we didn't, and I can't change that.
Maybe they should have put you in charge a little earlier. But
I don't know about that.
But here we are. We've got Mr. Byrne, right? And that's what we got from SC&G in 2015. And in that testimony in 2015, Mr. Burns using the fact, right, that SC&G performed an internal review, that it performed its analysis on the consortium's data to support the request that this was the best information, that the consortium's numbers should be approved by the commission. Isn't that right?
I'm going to tell you when I start this that I'm speculating, okay? But I don't think he did. You'd have to ask him. I think he was saying that the contractor knows more about how to build these power plants than does our finance and business team. But that's my speculation. I don't know.
Okay, before we get to another one, it's about time to break. I just want to sort of the thought for the afternoon while you're contemplating the pace of as we're going. Thanksgiving's in 2 weeks. Christmas is in 47 days. So, and just in case you're interested, my birthday is in 39. So we'll be back in 10 minutes.